All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Lasting Learning Podcast. Today, you are in for a treat because, as if one Dave talking about grades wasn't enough for you, today you've got two. Well, I don't know. Are we really talking grades? Are we talking gradeless? I'm not really sure if we're talking about grades or if we're talking about the absence of grades, but either way, it's going to be a fun conversation because I got a guy on today who speaks my language, says a lot of things that I think, but I have a feeling we're going to disagree from time to time. And I have a feeling those of you that are listening are going to be disagreeing with both of us, one of us, whatever, multiple times. So sit back, listen up. Got a boy from Jersey here to talk going gradeless. David, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. This is a conversation I've been excited to have for a while, and I think some of the listeners are going to be excited too once we get going and see where this conversation goes. But other than being a Jersey boy who likes to talk grades, can you introduce yourself to the world a little bit?
Sure. I'm a high school physics teacher, husband, father of two. As a father of two, I don't know how you find time to do everything that you do. But yeah, big baseball fan. I coached for 8 years at the high school level. And a lot of that kind of seeped into the classroom. And, I use a lot of those strategies. There's a big connection between coaching and the way I view teaching. So, that's it. I'm a simple guy. I didn't plan on doing anything that I'm doing. It just kind of happened. I was frustrated and just saw a need for change and tried some things out and had some success.
All right, well, let's just jump into this. First of all, there's nothing simple about a physics teacher. Right there, like you're already way above my bar. So feel free to talk down to me if necessary today and simplify things. But you're also a baseball coach. I don't know if this is even a fair question, but when you introduce yourself to people, do you introduce yourself as a baseball coach or as a physics teacher, or do you always put them both hand in hand?
I think you have to put them hand in hand.
Okay.
You know, the way that I approach teaching and learning is no different than the way I approach coaching on the field. So, I can't have a conversation about what I do without talking about me as a coach.
Okay. So let's talk coaching first then. As a coach, do you coach because it's all about fun, it's about learning, or do you coach to win?
Oh, that's a loaded question because it depends on the level,
Okay.
right? So, sub varsity, I've been a varsity assistant. I coach JV, and I coach my daughter in her own softball. And each level's very, very different. There's different expectations. When you're coaching below varsity, yeah, you want to win. You always want to win, but it's about teaching, it's about learning, it's about developing. When you get to that varsity level, then winning becomes more important, right? You've gone through all of that development, and now it's the stage where you need to perform. So, it really all depends on who's in front of you. And just like we do in the classroom, you don't treat everybody the same way.
Yeah. It's funny. I was watching this viral video on, I don't know if it was Instagram or Facebook or something this weekend. It was showing 6-year-old soccer. And the coach was talking to the kids in a huddle saying, guys, remember, we're just here to have fun. We're just here to have fun. And parents in the background are yelling, no, we're here to win. We're here to win. Tell them the truth. And it was ironic and funny, but I mean, these were 6-year-olds. So what is the difference between varsity and 6-year-olds or middle school or even JV? Where does that threshold change?
Sure. Like when you get to the varsity level, you've already gone through the paces. They know how to pick up a bat. They know where the bases are. They know when to advance on a ground ball and when to tag up and when to take extra bases and all of that stuff they've been doing for a decade, right? And so, you've gone through those steps where you've broken the game down and it's like, okay, here's how you field a ground ball. Okay, great. Now, once you've fielded the ground ball, here's how you step and throw to first base. And like at those younger grades, like, with my daughter and I had 14 6 year olds, which was like wrangling cats. But like, it was by the end of the season, they really had good fundamentals, and you know, we broke down their swings, and like just from how they placed their feet to how they held the bat, and you know, every little step. If you're focused on winning, you're skipping those little things. They're not developing. You're taking shortcuts to get to a result, as opposed to actually building these foundational understandings of, this is how I engage with the game, right? But when you get to the varsity level, they've gone through all those steps. They've already practiced how to field ground balls thousands of times. They've already made thousands of throws to first base. You know, they've stolen bases, they've taken their swings, they've hit off of tees, coach pitch, machines, live games. So, you know, they're at a different level of development. So they're no longer needing those foundational skills. Now they have to apply them in a way that is productive.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm having flashbacks to when I was a coach of one of my son's teams. Yeah, I'm father of 4 kids, so I'm everything you're talking right now. I'm relating to a coach pitch, and trying to develop them and making sure that every kid got the perfect pitch, but knowing that I have a full bucket, so I'm going to keep throwing until they can swing until they hit. And we never kept score. Even as a coach, that used to frustrate me. We didn't keep score. We made sure everybody got the opportunity to go through, and everybody got an opportunity to bat every single inning. And but we knew beginning and end. But we didn't keep score, and it was a very strategic reason, is because we were working on the development of the player. We wanted to make sure every single kid learned how to make contact, and then the fielders had the opportunity, like you said, to throw to first and get the outs. But you said that you teach similar to the way that you coach, or you have the same mindset.
Mhm.
So you using this analogy of baseball, and not necessarily keeping score, not necessarily focus on wins and losses during the developmental stage. Draw that connection for those people that don't necessarily know all that you think about teaching and learning, and all that you speak about, and all that you write about. Make that connection for people that are looking to say, why are you guys talking baseball right now?
Sure. So I refer to myself as a coach in the classroom. All right. And what that means is, you know, you hear people say meet students where they are. And I very much do that. Like, we do everything off of a strengths perspective. So we have our learning progressions. These are the skills that we'd like you to develop by the end of the year. And, you know, there's a very strategic way that we go about it, from the lessons that we choose, the sequence of our units. And what we do is we just identify where a student's strengths are, and we build from there. So every conversation that I have with the student, so let's just take creating explanations. So that's something that we do in our class, and we have a whole learning progression built around that. In September, when they come into my class, I expect them to be a novice, right? They haven't had the practice. And so, you know, we do some assignments, they answer questions, and you know, they give me their work, and I say, okay, great. You answered the question. Now, the next time you do this, maybe try and add some vocabulary that might enhance your answer. And so you're giving them a tip. So the next time that they try it, it's not, all right, here's your score, move on. It's great. This is what you did well. And here's how we can make it even better the next time we try it. And they'll practice it again. And maybe they do it, maybe they don't. And you still have those conversations, and you develop that foundational understanding of, okay, I need to start bringing in this vocabulary. And then once they get that down, okay, great. You're talking about it using the vocabulary of the unit. Now, explicitly define it. So rather than just saying this is based on Newton's second law, actually state what Newton's second law says, and said, because of that, here's my answer. And so you're providing them this framework of how they can develop mental models, and how they can engage with any topic, right? And, you know, by just kind of spiraling through, and it doesn't end at the end of the unit, right? If they don't have that skill perfected, they're not going to be an expert by the end of unit 1. So we continue into unit 2. We just have different vocabulary that we're using, and we're trying to implement. And so, you know, that coaching mentality is just finding their strengths and finding the one or two things that's going to get them to that next developmental level. And then once they're solidly at that next developmental level, we find the one or two things that's going to push them even further. And each time we just kind of supplement what they're doing well with a couple more things that they can use to make it even better.
Love that. So let me give you another baseball example with my kids and see how this relates to your classroom. So my third son, an athlete from the time he fell out of the womb, walking, kicking footballs, roller skating, roller blading, dunking basketballs, like doing it all. Remember, he was in a t-ball league where hitting off the tee was not a challenge for him. He'd walk up and he'd look at the tee and say, and he'd push it down and look at me or one of the other coaches and say, throw it to me faster, throw it to me faster, and wanted to crush the ball. Even though he's playing amongst 5-year-olds and the rules were you hit it off the tee, we were coach pitching to him and like zipping the ball to him so that he could hit it. In your classroom, I'm assuming that there are times when there are students that come in and say, I don't need that low level stuff that you're making us all do. Just pitch it to me. Yeah, I got this Newton's second law thing. I got it. Don't make me jump through these hoops. How does that work in your
Absolutely.
class?
So, first off, we never use the term low level, right? And that there's no such thing as high level, low level in our class. We have a class expectation,
Mm,
right? And if a student's ready to exceed that expectation, I already know what the next level is. So I'm going to coach them up to that next level without making that the expectation of the class. So this way, the rest of the students don't feel behind. They don't feel like they need to rush to get to a place that they're not ready for. Right. And then as a class, when we're ready to reveal that next developmental level, we do that as a class. But, there's nobody in my class that is coasting.
mm.
There's nobody that is not appropriately challenged. And that's the thing. We have a really difficult time appropriately challenging students. We don't know how to differentiate as a profession very well. And I think the reason for that is we differentiate opportunity when we should be differentiating support.
Mm.
So what I've done is I've gone away from saying, okay, here are the assignments that you do because you're at this level, but you're ready to do these more advanced assignments because the students who don't get those advanced assignments, they know it, they feel it. So we're all doing the same assignments and they're structured in a way that the conversation that I have with you is different than the conversation that I have with the student next to you. Maybe I'm giving you extension questions because you know everything that's going on. So I'm going to challenge you and say, okay, have you thought about how this ties into this other unit that we studied? Or have you thought about maybe how you can apply this to this situation here? And where the student who is more on the novice end of the spectrum, I'm giving them more guiding questions where it's okay. You're going to want to try and look at it this way. Have you thought about trying this? And, really kind of guiding them step by step just until they get that muscle memory of, this is the way that I approach problem solving. This is the way that I approach interpreting graphs or creating graphs or whatever it is. And so they're appropriately challenged because the support that we give them is differentiated in a way that every student's getting what they need.
So you're using a buzzword that I think a lot of people are familiar with in education: differentiation, and differentiating tasks, assignments, supports, even assessments to some extent. And I think that's a term that a lot of people have used to say, I'm going to do things differently for every single kid, which we could really dive into that if we have some time here later on. But I'm curious how this all fits in with the big theme of what you talk about, or what you're really becoming known for right now, which is this concept of going gradeless. So everything that you've just spoken about, I would say the vast majority of educators would hear what you said. Vast majority of parents and students who just heard what you just said would say, yeah, that makes sense. Find my level of challenge, meet me there, identify my strengths, build around it, push me to keep growing. That makes sense. So going gradeless, how does that fit into all of this?
Sure. So the majority of teachers are doing very good things in their classroom, but they're doing one or two things to undermine those very good things.
Hmm.
And what we found is that the grade very much undermined all the good things that we were doing. And, you know, if you're saying it's about practice, it's about improvement, it's about all these other things, and then you put a grade on it that's going to stick with that student for the remainder of the year, well, they care more about the product than they do the process. And so all of that feedback that we give them, they completely ignore, right? If if the homework is counting for a grade, they're going to do it to get the grade, not to get the practice, right? The test, they're going to find tricks and ways to get around your test, or they're going to try and cheat, and they're not going to do authentic work to where they're actually going to develop and learn. So every conversation that I was having with students came back to the grade being the challenge. Now, um, you know, we're a little more structured than others in the gradeless community, and so I've been challenged on that, and I that's fine. I do have a gradeless classroom, all right, but we're differentiating our model a little bit, and we're calling it the learning progression model, as not to be confused with other gradeless teachers. Just I respect what they're doing, and I respect their intent, but I think we need a little more consistency. And so that's kind of how we approach it. But removing the grade allows you to have authentic conversations. It allows you to meet students where they are, where, and I did standards based grading for a while,
Mhm.
and I was finding the same challenges. It was better. It was way better than what I was doing when I was doing traditional grading, but it was still all right. This is going to translate to a B, or like
Mhm.
they're trying to guess what it's going to come out to, and like all that time that we had to take to like kind of train them away from that, it was just easier to say, you know what, you're not getting a grade until we need to at the semester and the end of the year as required by the school. And my administration has been amazing with that. They've let me, that doesn't mean we don't communicate progress, but we don't put letter and number grades on it. It's just, okay, here's where you're at, here's what you need to do. um, you know and when we talk about grades, and I know you talk about this a lot, it doesn't matter what symbol you use, whether it's a check, whether it's a word, or a grade is evaluative feedback, right? So gradeless is we're moving away from evaluative feedback in any form, whatever arbitrary symbol that may be, and we're moving more towards that descriptive feedback. And that's really the essence of gradeless. There aren't those arbitrary symbols. Yeah, we have a structure where students can goal set and track progress, and there's terminology that they can use in order to communicate so that they know where they are and what they need to do, but it's not the focus of the course.
So much to unpack in that. And I'm so excited right now. I've got like the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up right now. And yes, people, I do have some hair somewhere, just not on my head. Um, so I'm excited about this. Let's unpack this definition of grades, because I think that's an intriguing concept that you just put out there, and I think it's something that people need to understand to go any further into this conversation. Because yeah, I do talk grading with a lot of people, and no matter where you start the conversation, there's always the leap to, but how does that translate to an A, B, or C? But how does that translate into a GPA? But the colleges need this, the high school, blah, blah, blah. And there's all these excuses for all the other people that need it with the exception of what the students need to keep learning and growing. So when you say the elimination of evaluative feedback, talk to us about what evaluative means. Are you judgmental feedback? Is that what you're saying? Like
Yeah.
where there's an end point and you're saying good, bad, or ugly at that moment in time?
Yeah. And so when we talk about feedback, and this goes back to Ruth Butler's work,
Yeah.
and you're talking about, there's two categories. There's the evaluative, and a lot of people, when they move away from grades, they'll use statements like "good job."
Mhm.
That's still you're evaluating, you're judging whether or not that student.
That subjective lens. Yeah.
Yeah. And so next time that student submits work, if they don't get good job, their thought is, well, I didn't do a good job. Right. And so they already have that expectation where when you're talking about descriptive feedback, it's not about a judgment on the ego of the person or how well they did. So for instance, like we were talking about before with explanations, a student like gives you an explanation and say, okay, great. In this explanation, so you're talking about the work, you're not talking about how well that student did. In this explanation, um, the question was clearly answered, and there's vocab from the unit in here. Now, in this explanation, that vocab was not clearly defined. So this work would fall into this category. It's about the work. It's not about the person. So you're talking about the work and you're talking about how the work can get better. All right. And you know, so when you're when you're focused on how to improve something, students are more receptive. When you just say, well, you didn't do a good job, do better next time, and they have no clue how, that's where they shut down. That's where they get frustrated. And that's where a lot of that um, adversarial relationship between the teacher as the gatekeeper of the grade and the student trying to achieve what they view as their goal, which is solely a grade and not learning. And that's where a lot of that disconnect comes in. And yeah, go ahead.
No, no, no. So you're saying some things right now, and again, I'm just trying to picture the minds of those people that are driving right now. Maybe they're on a vacation somewhere, and they're trying to process all of this. Maybe emphatic when I say this. I agree with everything that you are saying right now. So if somebody wants to pick a fight with you, they're picking a fight with me right now as well. Um, so let me bring up a question that might be stewing in somebody's mind. They might be saying, okay, Dave, that makes perfect sense. I hear you, but it seems so sterile. You basically just said, I'm just supposed to respond to the task and dismiss the kid. I've been told for years that it's all about the kids. It's all about the relationships. And when I'm differentiating, I'm supposed to take into account the passions and the interests and the strengths and the weaknesses of every single child. But now you're saying, I'm just supposed to be completely objective, just focus on the task at hand, just give this feedback that's very black and white. You're in telling people where they are on this learning progression without taking into account who they are and whether or not they're sensitive, or what about that kid that does need that attaboy and that you're doing great and rah rah. They need that cheerleader, don't they?
Well, and there are students that need that. And what we've done moving to this approach, we have much better relationships with our students now. We
Mm,
get to know them personally and academically. So, yeah. And I've had tons of conversations that are completely non academic. Yeah, I've had more conversations of that nature than I ever have throughout my career. So I know my students way better now than I ever did. But when we're talking about work, we only talk about the work. The attaboy and good job, that, that's about the effort. That's about all the other things. So, I see how hard you're working towards this. And, I love the way that you're approaching this. And like, so that's where the attaboys come in. It's not with, oh, hey, you did a great job on this essay, or you like this problem was super. Like that stuff I don't care about. It's just like, you know what? I see you grinding. I know this is a challenge for you, and I see the way that you're sticking with it, and I love it.
mm,
I love the way you're approaching this problem. I love the fact that you never give up. I see you helping that student on the other side of the room who doesn't understand it as well as you do. And it's about building that community and building that culture. And what we've tried to do, and if you notice, that sounds a lot like SEL. We've embedded a lot of those practices within our assessment model, within what we coach in the classroom. So it's not just something that we do as a one-off.
mhm,
It's not something that's um like here's your assembly on it, and then we don't look at it again. We're always doing self-assessment. We're always we're self-aware. We're trying to build relationships. And we talk about like choices and what the impact choices have on their goals. And we do goal setting all the time. We do conferencing, we do mini conferences in class, we do more formal conferences like 3 to 4 times a year where we sit down and we look through a portfolio of everything that they've done. We talk about their challenges, we talk about their areas of strength, their areas of opportunity. So like you're right, when you're talking about the work itself, yeah, it is very sterile. We don't want it to be about the kid, right? It's about the work. This is how the work gets better. That's not a judgment on you as a person. That is not where you get your value.
I love that. I love that, but especially that last little piece. I think some of the biggest pushback that I've received, I'm sure you've received as well, from those people that push back against grades and limiting grades, taking grades away. It doesn't necessarily come from the kids that have traditionally struggled and need specific feedback. It tends to be from those people who hang their identity on the letter grade that's been in front of their name. It's I am an A student, or I am an honor roll student, because the grade doesn't represent the work. It represents who they are as a person. It has become a judgment, an identity creator, or whatever you want to call it. Well, so what you're saying, remove the whole going gradeless piece from this, but what you're saying is one of the big foundational mindsets is that you are assessing the outcomes or the evidence of learning, not the quality of the learner. Is that fair?
Yeah, fair.
Okay. So let's go back to baseball. So do you believe in baseball at any level, we should be calculating individual batting averages? Should we be calculating OPS and on base percentage and slugging percentage? Should we be grading baseball players and athletes?
That's how they make their money at the professional level, but
Yeah.
anything below that, it's team wins.
Yeah.
That's it. It's just everybody brings a different skill set. Look, you don't expect your leadoff hitter to, if they're batting 200, but like their on base is, 450, you'll take that.
Right.
Right. So like, it's not about any individual skill set. It's just, everybody has different tools that they bring to the table. And that's the whole thing with strengths perspective, is how can we find your individual strengths and grow you from there?
I had somebody that came at me one time, instead of using batting averages, use free throw percentage, and said, do you think you should be calculating points per game in basketball and a player's free throw percentage? If you're saying that you shouldn't be calculating this kind of stuff, should you be doing that? And to be honest with you, it is an apples and orange conversation.
Sure.
One of the reasons is, I'll use batting average, for example, or on base percentage. That is completely based off of a frequency. The number of times a kid goes to the plate and the number of times the kid gets on base. That is what you're calculating. It's very easy to quantify and to understand what you're talking about. In a classroom, for people that want to try to make that equation and say we should be using percentages or points or grades, your grades are not based off of a frequency or the number of times a kid gets a standard correct. That's not what you're calculating. In baseball, it's you get a pitch, you swing, you hit. In class, it's not, I'm going to ask you questions about the same thing, the same way, and show me how many times you can get a question correct. That's not what you do. You throw so many different variables at kids, and then you try to come up with one little number to quantify what it all means, and somebody's supposed to make sense of it. And it doesn't make sense.
Well, and the other thing is they're looking at professionals, right? So you're looking at people who are at the end of their learning journey, right? They're now applying everything that they learned.
Yeah.
You can't take that expectation and put that on a novice, and like, well, I'm preparing them for work, or I'm preparing them for college, and everybody's always preparing them for something else. Why not just teach them while they're there? And like, why not just focus on the focus learning, right? Like let's just grow learners. And if you teach them what they need to know when they're in front of you, guess what's next? They'll take care of itself.
Now I'm going to ask kind of a loaded question, as if any of my other questions haven't been loaded so far. But you teach physics, right?
Yep.
Is it fair to say that physics is a different world than any other class? Because you're going to hear this from people. Well, yeah, that might work in a physics classroom, right?
Yeah, learning's learning. It doesn't matter what it is. And, um, what we've done is we've gone through, and in our book, you'll see that we actually take examples from ELA, fine arts, history, math, and it's all the same, right? So we apply our model to all different subject areas, and I think that's part of the challenge that we have is we compartmentalize and we say, okay, well, this is learning in physics, this is learning in history, this is learning in art. It's not, right? So we're going through these different progressions, and a lot of them overlap. I don't care what subject you're in. You're gonna have to explain your thought process. You're gonna have to come up with an explanation, right? I use this example all the time. In science, we write lab reports, and our conclusion is in the claim, evidence, reasoning format. And our ELA teachers use claim, evidence, warrant when when they're doing their papers. Like, so if we stop telling students that learning is different, they'll stop thinking that learning is different, because it's not.
The only place we departmentalize learning is in school, right?
Yeah.
It's so true. So, and I agree with you. It's really it transcends a physics classroom. And it's interesting that you teach high school physics and you're talking about this because so many people will say, well, yeah, that works in elementary, but it can never work at the secondary level. Now you're a secondary guy saying, yeah, in physics it works, but it also works in other classrooms as well. But you did mention that you do have, you do have some hard, fast rules that you still have to abide by. You have to submit grades at the semester point because you've got policies and procedures that are dictating that. Can you walk us through those people that are saying this all sounds good, but I have a handbook I got to follow too. I've got procedures. How do you calculate a grade for a student then when you're forced to, when you're put in the corner?
So we have a grade translation chart, and what we've done is we've structured our course in such a way that we know what practice students will have. We know how much practice they're going to have, and the opportunity. It's all about opportunity. Do they have an opportunity to develop to this specific level, right? And that becomes the expectation for a grade eventually. And it's not, obviously, um if circumstances change, we alter. When COVID hit, we changed that conversion chart because now everything that we had planned went out the window. So it's a framework. It's not a hard and fast rule. And like I said before, my district has been amazingly supportive. And so I'm allowed to completely override my mid year grade. So I don't average mid year and final. So their final grade is 100% their grade. So they are allowed to develop for 10 months. And then at the end of the 10 months, that is where their learning is then, we we go through with the portfolio, with conferencing, and we say, okay, here's where you're at. And obviously, we have that framework of a grade translation chart that's based on, um, you know, what what we have given them as practice, but different scenarios, each student's different. Like, if you're looking at the level of development, the level of growth from September to June, if that's off the charts, but they don't happen to fall in that framework, well, you know what? You've done more than most of the class. And, so that's, we don't even use that scale. So I know people are saying that's a little mushy, but you know what? If a kid has grown tremendously, why shouldn't they get credit for that? It's not their fault that we ran out of time for them to continue to develop. But yeah, so we have great translation charts, and I have stuff out on Twitter and like the blogs and all that. It's all based on, if you have to do this quarterly, all right, what practice are you giving them to the quarter? And what level will they have the opportunity to achieve, and then mid-year, whatever it is. And so you can scale this however you need to scale this, and it really, it's just there to have a conversation. Are they on pace? Are they growing? Are are there certain areas where they're developing off the charts, where others maybe that they're not growing as much? And it's all just about where do we need to have our conversations and focus our attention.
So I'm going to try to take this into a quantifiable realm, for those people that are living in a points-based world or a percentage-based world or ABC world. When you start talking about measuring growth and whether or not they're where they should be or where they tracking, how do you determine that? Do you have a clear-cut finish line, not necessarily a standard, but a standard, if you will, that you say, I'm going to try to get kids as close to that as possible, and then you're.
Yeah, and like I said, we look at it with the practice that we're providing.
Mhm.
And with problem solving, we have like all the way up to like our expert level. So it's beginning, developing, proficient, advanced, and expert. So at the proficient level, they're setting up a problem to where you can follow their thought process. So they don't have to explain to you, this is what I did. Here's the equation I used. You can see, all right, here's their illustration. Here's all the information that they took from the problem. Here's the unknown that they're trying to solve for, the equation that they use. Here's where they plugged in their numbers, and here's their answer. Right? That's our proficient level. And then at the advanced level, they're getting the answers correct.
Mhm.
But then at the expert level, that's where it's a complex multi-step problem. So if I'm not giving them the opportunity to do a multi-step problem, I can't hold them accountable to be an expert. So that's kind of how we judge where the finish line is. What practice, what opportunity are we allowing them to have? Right. And like I said, when COVID hit, that opportunity got cut short. So we had to adjust because those things that we typically do in that last quarter of the year, they didn't have access to.
Gotcha. So in essence, I'm thinking about like big state tests that people have to give, those big scary monsters that happen every April or May in states across America. Kids will end up getting, in most states it's a 4-point scale or a 5-point scale of proficient, exceeding, below, whatever, developing. They get some of those labels, but they are held to a standard, whether or not a teacher was able to expose them to the content or not, whether they gave them the opportunity to learn it or not. If a teacher didn't get there, the student is still held accountable for it, and they're penalized with a score. What you do is you take some of that ownership as the teacher and say, if I didn't get you there, if I didn't give you that opportunity, I'm not going to use a grade as a stick against you and say, shame on you for not getting a place I never took you. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And so the one thing that I will say is we actually cover more content now
Mm.
because we're not reteaching skills. We make sure that students have those foundational understandings before we move on to that next developmental level. So we're not reteaching. And what we found, and we changed our entire sequence, we've changed our labs, our lessons, so that we could support those different levels of development. We said, okay, this unit doesn't have a lot of problem solving, so we can teach our investigation skills here and really get those down. Because when we talk about cognitive load, we didn't want to overload them and try and teach them too many things at once, because if you try and teach them too many things at once, they don't absorb anything.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, it's using the batting example. If you're teaching a kid their batting stance and their grip, and watching the fastball versus the changeup versus the curveball, and as soon as they hit it, to put the bat down, and then it's too much for them to take on. It's all important. It's all going to get them on first base, but one step at a time. Teach them on the tee
absolutely.
first, then teach the pitch. Then yeah, gotcha. So for teachers that are hearing this right now, that are struggling with that cognitive load right now, that are hearing all this, saying, "Oh my gosh, this is so much." I mean, I've got a pacing guide. I've got a curriculum. I'm required to give grades every single week. I have to give grades that are based off of tests. I have in my grade book, I've got summative assessments. I've got formative assessments. I have to do a 10-point scale that I convert to a percentage, that I convert to a letter grade, that I then have to explain to parents at parent-teacher conferences. And you're telling me to tear all that up and start from scratch. David, where do I begin?
Well, yeah. So it is a lot, and this is 6 years of development. So for anybody hearing this and thinking that it's a little overwhelming, I get that. And yeah, and I think, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, a lot of people shy away from moving to alternate assessment because of that front loaded effort. Right. And I think it was the one of the episodes that you had with Caitlin Giordano, talking about where are you putting in your work? Are you
Yeah.
putting in your work in designing the assessments or grading them? You
Yep.
know, and we're putting in those hours on either end. But yeah, this front loaded effort, it is a lot. But what we've done is we've put together a step-by-step guide of how you can get there. So I want to take everybody's learning curve and just shorten it. So what took me 6 years, I wanted to take somebody else a year, right? Go through your curriculum with this in mind. And like, here are the steps that I took, just follow it. Right. And here you can design it, you can implement it. And we try to make a model that was flexible because we understand that some districts won't allow you to go gradeless.
Yeah.
Right. So, how can we have those principles that allow you the flexibility to translate to a grade at whatever frequency your district requires, while still de-emphasizing, those negative impacts of traditional grading?
Yeah. And I love the fact that you were able to take some time today and deconstruct your definition of gradeless, because it is different than some of the other models that are out there. There are, again, I want to assume the good and doubt the bad, assume everybody's got positive intent behind everything that they're doing. What you're doing, though, is rooted in research-based best practices that talks about providing specific and timely feedback, that talks about communicating standards of excellence, that talks about multiple growth opportunities. All of that is embedded in everything that you're doing. You're honestly, it's almost like you talk about everything but grading. You're not talking about like just ripping away feedback and saying just students go learn what you want to do. It's a Montessori on steroids. Learn at your own pace. Learn what you want, when you want, where you want. Which is what some of the models are. And I'm glad that you were able to say no. I'm actually talking about providing more specific, relevant feedback for students so they know where they are, when they're there, and how to continue to grow and get better. Because that's the root of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thought process behind that, I think it was Grant Wiggins that said that, I'm paraphrasing, but in order for feedback to be effective, it has to be consistent.
Yes.
Right. So students need to know when they walk into your class, when they walk into my class, that this is what high quality work looks like. Right. And I understand those other models, and I same thing. They have very good intent, and there are some very intelligent people that are doing that, but it's not scalable because what'll happen is students, it's going to go back to that traditional model where, like traditional grading, there's a million different versions of what traditional grades are. And if we have the this is how I do it approach, then students are still left to figure out, well, okay, this is what Dave likes, and this is what my other teacher likes, and you know they're still trying to navigate and figure it out for your class rather than just understanding this is how I engage with learning, and you know these are the things that I need to do to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, you are spot on. And what's unfortunate is that I feel like at times we take the fast food approach in education. I jokingly tell people, John Hattie is a prime example of this, where people see the graphics on Pinterest, they see the images on Instagram and Twitter, and they say, "Oh, effect sizes. I know what that's all about." But very few people have actually done the work to do the research and understand what it's all about.
Hmm.
And I think it's the same thing that we're seeing right now with this idea of grades. There's this pushback against using grades, which I agree. There should be some pushback against using grades as the way that grades have always been used as this carrot and stick and this motivator that labels kids, as opposed to providing specific and relevant feedback. But so I'm going to try to connect those two worlds for people that are listening to this right now to show them why what you're doing is so important. Using the work of John Hattie. When we look at the work of John Hattie, the huge meta-analysis of 80,000 plus studies that have said what actually works in schools. What John Hattie's research says very clearly is not to do any of these things in isolation, but it's the intertwining of these things that matters most. In the top 10 of his effects of the things that really work in schools, some things that you've just hit on. Number one, students self-reported grading. Number three is consistent feedback. You've got teacher-student relationships, which is rooted in feedback. They have to trust that you have their best interests at heart. We've talked about not labeling students. It says it right here, not labeling students. All of those things in conjunction, when you're out there looking for the silver bullet, the magic pill to take to fix what's wrong with schools, it's right here. This is it. What you just described is all of those things combined. It's not toss out grades and just let things happen as they might. It is very specific. It is very concrete. It is focus on the evidence, provide feedback on the evidence, and move students forward, focusing on growth, not a label. And I think you're nailing it right now, David. You're absolutely nailing it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, it's awesome, man.
Yeah. And so getting back to the relationships,
Yeah.
right? And because that's a big thing, relationships and accountability. You know, a lot of people think that you can't have accountability and a good relationship. And, I ran into a student at the end of this year, and it's a student who wound up failing my class. A student that I had conversations with.
I'm going to pause you right now because people's minds just got blown. People can fail your class?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
What?
you know what? So we work on evidence.
Yeah.
And, if I don't have enough evidence to make a professional judgment on where you are as a student, I don't have enough evidence to translate into a grade.
Boom.
And
There you
that's
go.
how a student would fail my class.
Got it.
And so, but I can identify that in October. I can identify that, all right, look, you're not engaging with the class in a way that's going to be consistent with what your goal is. And so this student, I started having conversations with him in October. We got the parents in, we got guidance in, and the whole year I said, look, I'm here to help you. And the whole year was just a struggle. And he wound up just not doing anything really. And so I saw him at the end of this year, and I had seen him in the halls. Hey, how you doing? And it wasn't that, oh, like, how they duck their head and like walk past you if they failed your class. Very pleasant. Like, he understood, like, it was clearly communicated. This is everything that you need to do in order for me to be able to even have a conversation with you. And he understood that he didn't do it, you know. But then I saw him at the end of this year, and I said, how you doing? And like, we walked out to the parking lot together, and he's like, my mindset is way better this year. Like, he's talking to me about mindset because he understood those were the things that we discuss. It wasn't, hey, you're a bad kid, you failed my class. It's just like, all right, here are some choices. Here's how those choices impact you. And, like, when you have the mindset that this is what you want to do, you're going to be fine. And when you choose to make that mental shift, I'm here to help you. And on that walk out to the parking lot, he said, you know what? He's like, I think my mindset's where it needs to be right now, and I'm going to do okay in college.
Wow.
And like, to me, that was awesome. And here's a kid that got the worst possible grade you can get in my class, but he understood that was not a value judgment on him.
That's good stuff right there. And you might have just wrapped it up for everybody that's listening, saying, give me an example of this working. And it's ironic that your example of this working is through the lens of, in the traditional grading sense, where the traditional grades don't work. You just said this is a kid who failed, but he's not a failure. He did not have the evidence of success, and as a result failed my class. But looking back on it right now, he's a success because he learned so much from the feedback that you gave him and the guidance that you gave him, through simply saying the evidence wasn't there. And light bulbs. That's awesome. So, David, I gave everybody the opportunity on the podcast here as the episode winds up to capture everybody one last time, to imagine that you're on a stage, everybody's listening to your words, you're doing a keynote for the world here. The entire world is ready to transform what they're doing in classrooms, and they're on the edge of their seats like I am here, but you got that mic in your hands. What is the thing that you would want to leave people with before you drop the mic and walk off the stage, ready to just transform and change people's minds? No pressure. I mean, just yeah.
That's it. You know, um, want to treat students better. That's it.
Mm.
Just want to treat students better. Even if you're treating them good, want to treat them better.
Wow. That might be one of the most profound statements that's ever been made on this podcast. Because at first, when you said it, it sounds so simple, but wow, to want to treat kids better, that you have to want to treat kids better. That is that is worth reflecting on right there. People that are listening, ask yourself, do you really want to treat kids better? And with that comes the belief that you could and you should and you can. So take that, think about that, reflect on that, and then start planning those next steps to put into action. And one of those next steps is going to be connecting with David here, and he's going to share how you can connect, and then going out and getting a copy of his book and joining one of the epic book studies that are going on all over the place right now, or just engaging in some conversations with him. But David, how can people connect with you and keep this conversation going?
Sure. Well, Twitter is the best place. It's at David Frangiosa. Yeah, and then I have a website where I have a blog, a podcast. So that's reimagineschools.com. And I'm really trying to, each one of the podcast episodes, I'm trying to take one small topic and just show how it applies to the classroom. And then the blog posts, it's that's a little more diverse, talking about other issues in education. But it's my opinion, which as you can see, I'm not afraid to share.
Well, it is your opinion rooted in objective fact. So take that. It's not just your humble opinion anymore. It is based off of research. It is based off of empirical evidence. How you've applied it might be your own gifting and your own flair, but this is something that I'm hoping that teachers everywhere will take and they will run with, because it's best for kids. Because 6 years ago, you said, I want to do better for kids. And you took it, ran with it, and did something about it. David, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and have this conversation. I'm hoping it's just the first of many, many more that we can engage in stuff like this on a more regular basis, and just continue to change the world, man. You are doing great things. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Absolutely.